Oh, oh. So divine, come and get your love. Oh, it's not showing up yet. It says live, but it's not. I bet you 10 to 1 it's because of the stupid fucking solar flare. I don't care for the aurora borealis. If it's gonna mess up my stream. Okay, so far so good. Oh my god. Okay, try again. I was just getting into it too. Okay, what was I doing? Yeah, okay, so I got that one. Last one's up there, but I need some frozen stuff. Oh, I need a. Wait, nope. Switch for right now. Okay, so as far this is working. Maybe if I don't record the video as well. Because streaming is okay, but I was also trying to record it too. But I know Twitch actually records this. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm not gonna. I think I'll download from Twitch instead. It takes forever to download from Twitch, but at least it will work. Okay, try again. Share. Oh no, wrong person, wrong thing. Where did she go today? Hello. Okay, there. I did it again. Okay. That's what happened last time. I was tending to my phone and it fucked up. Yeah. Remember remember I was like trying to share and various other stuff and next thing you know it won't let me do the thing. Awkward angle. Oh. Awkward angle. Don't ask. What's the matter with the oh shit, I forgot there was bokoblins over here. Oh fuck, he spotted me. Ah, you into the fray! Oh shit, they got. It's gonna break. Oh yeah, no, I'm not chasing that. Oh, there goes my shield. I'll take your torch. Where's the other dude? Hello. You know what? Foliage, you're in the way. I got that come and get your love stuck in my head for some reason. If you hadn't noticed. I don't know. I just all of a sudden it popped in my head. Come and get your love. Okay, there's that. Come and get your love. Okay, yeah. I just need a knot. Maybe that's it. I just need a knot. So my goddamn mobile is messing up. I don't know if it's because I can barely get a signal or not. I Okay, it still works. I just need to leave it right there. Wrong. I am so used to the stupid. I like how I was gonna have a pizza before I started this. Put the damn pizza down on the table, and then here I am, just, sitting here. Completely. Yeah, true. I was trying to get the freaking OBS working in my stream. That's why I forgot. Well, I was also trying to make it so I can so people can see my chat. Because when I do the live, you don't see it. But there's certain systems, certain things that you can do, and I'm still new to this. I haven't asked around or looked around for any of that stuff. So I'm trying to learn. I want to be a pro streamer, but at the same time, I don't have the time or the means to do it. Then again, I probably need a better computer too. I have enough. I need more food. I need to go back down. Ew. I gotta drink that. Yes. Whatever. Fish! Sure, I was gonna get meat. You know what? Yeah, let's damn Korok while we're at it. More meat. Meat from plants. Yeah! You found me! Bye-bye! Bacon! Bitch! Yeah, do that. I'll get a rusty sword. Splash. Rusty sword! It is a rusty sword, right? Yeah, it's a... Whoa! I keep forgetting. Certain swords are better than the others. Okay. And it... Hiya! Oh, no. Not close enough. It worked. Yeah, I think that should Fish! I was wanting fish. Okay, I guess we're gonna leap into the water. There's no fish. Why isn't there any fish? Fish flat. Tears of the Kingdom style. Go naked. I already got that one. Ow! Ow! Okay. There we go. Oh no! Oh. Done with it? I'm done. What did? Oh, you're not press hard? Well, press hard, but not too hard. You want to try again? No. I'm fine. You're too worried about breaking the screen? Oh, get mad at the game soon? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't know what I'm doing. No, I'm trying to get food, but I'm like, I feel like I'm not really looking. Bird nest. Nope, not bird nest. Damn it. I almost forget what trees have the birds. Well, I mean, I don't forget, but there's so many trees. Foliage. Oh, I didn't want that. Okay, whatever. Bird nest. Bird nest. No, it was just perched there. Damn it. Seriously, what are you hunting? All I see is me and you. Oh, you sure this? Oh. Usually there's a mushroom right there. There's nothing. I really need a brain. Let's shuffle the music, please. I know I love Redbone, but come on. What's up in this one? Big tree. Oh, I just scared a boar. God damn it. Well, at least I got an egg. Can I still get it from here? Nope. Disappeared. It disappeared. It ran. It goes. Am I stuck? I'm stuck. How the fuck did I... Okay. Never mind. I didn't... I didn't get stuck. The tree branch. The tree branch. I almost got stuck in the tree branch. Goddamn foliage. Ooh, ooh. Foliage, stop. Oh, I got an acorn with that one. No, I don't want it. I guess running around like this isn't gonna help me get moved. I'm just trying to... I'm foraging. I'm foraging. I don't know why I'm foraging right now, considering once I get the glider, I can go woohoo and get off, find more stuff, and I could get the wolves. You like that the tape's on the ground though? That way you're not going over the thing. And she can't hear me. I almost spilled my drink. I was here already. Why? Why? Oh, that's the castle. I need a new song. Rain, shuffle. I love that lizard. Whoop. Oh, that's why that's a hill. Oops. The lizard. And of course those fuckers see me. One down. Oh, shoot. What am I? I don't want to break that. Yeah. I really need to think of another song. The hand. I don't need the hand. It's still cold or it's starting to warm up? You want me to turn it up a little bit then? I'm trying to get my brain to think of something else, but I can't think of anything else. All it has on repeat. Huh? If I do, I'm gonna end up doing copyrights. Unless I get earbuds. I don't even know what I did with my earbuds. I don't know what I did with it. Ooh! Oh, god damn it. It was right beside me. The firefly. Okay, thank you, brain, but now I don't know the lyrics to that song. It's a song. Oh, why am I scaring all the freaking things I need? I just scared another lizard. That's the second lizard I've tried to capture. I would try to get that right there, but they're gonna try sting me. Also, there's a golem down there, and I do not want to grab it. I don't have the right stuff for it. I can come back later. I just now realized. Can I? I'd have to cross that. Never mind. Yeah, that's freezing cold water. I literally can't get across that. The only way I would be through this thing right here. But I need to get to it to get there. So I'd have to go over here, go all the way around. And it went from that one song back to freaking Redbone. Okay. I'm getting tired of it. Um, sniffle, 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 sniffle. Woohoo! I'm probably gonna die. Yes. Okay. Woohoo! I was about to hit Bluey. You can tell I'm freaking... What? Ah! I knew we were forgetting something. I don't have the money for it. Do you know how much? What? There we go. I got something else in my head now. Oh, I chopped the tree. Ah! Oh, and it flew away. Okay, whatever. You know what? F it. I'm gonna just go get that shrine thing. Oh yeah, I was like, what the fuck is that? I made you look. I made you look. Oh, there's more. I swear I thought I got them all. Amazing. Oh my gosh, I haven't heard this song in a while. Oh. Oh, got enough stamina. Dang it. I was gonna try that. Oh, dang it. Why? Why? Why do you have to? Oh, whoops. Yeah, I'm not grabbing that.
This time I'll raise the clear table again so servers else can come in here.
Okay. Let me get this real quick. Burn, baby, burn! I toasted it. Toasted acorn. No.
Yay.
I was like, what am I looking for? Almost lost what I was looking for. Hmm. I think I burnt my face. Because my nose feels tender.
Yup.
Ha ha! Blow up! Aw, blew up most of the stuff too. Oh well. Bow. I don't need a bow. Hey, at least I'll have pizza for lunch tomorrow. Barbara's trying to get me to take the mushroom one. I was like, ugh. Another reason why I said, ugh. I love mushrooms, but there was olives on that damn thing. I don't like olives. Just go to sleep, Kachan. On me, take on me, on me. Nice to say. Is it strange to have two songs in your head now? Now I got that damn Video Killed the Radio Star song. And I'm listening to Take On Me. So one half of my brain is singing Take Me On. And the other half is Video Killed the Radio Star. Oh my god. What the hell, brain? Hey, at least I got the other one out. The most bizarre way to do it, but okay. Where am I going? Oh, that's a bush. I thought that was something I could use. Fucking thing. Oh, I miss you. Die already! Oh, you have a damn. Oh, you. Food! 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 I'm dying! Okay. I'm good. Kinda forgot about that, dude. I think this song, since it's in the 80s, I think that's why I'm thinking of Video Killed the Radio Star. Because I've been wanting to hear that song too. I don't know why. I can hear it in my head, but like I actually wanted to hear the song. And this reminds me of it for some reason. So in my head, part of it's singing Video Killed the Radio Star. I'd laugh if nope, it's in console. First, there's no wolves on this thing. Usually, I find a wolf around here. I'm scared. I'm scared. If we wait together, pull me away would be sweet. There's the shrine. I wish I could fly to it. Oh, nope. Another use. knew he was up here. These feisty cold. The feisty cold atop these mountains can take quite a toll on the night sets. Oh, as the night sets. I can't read today. Overview of the entire plateau. You look on the shrine located. Place pins on your map markers. Yeah, no kidding. You can even see high roll. Ooh, I do need that one. That one. Oh, I'm surprised I got that one. I used all of them. Oops. Oh wow, I got that shrine. I mean that thingy. Saw that one. Wait, what was I supposed to do? I completely forgot. That goes what that shows what happens when I don't fully read. Have you found the shrines, remaining shrines? Fantastic. Just one more until you have my paraglider. Okay. I wish I could use it right now just to get to that one right there. Oh, oh, oh. Ran down that weird. This Barb always ends up with singing this song. The one that I have on my thing. It's Come Get Her. Napkin. Oh, hot, hot. I had letting you sit with help. Apparently not. Maybe if I take the skin off. I hate to do it, but I'm gonna have to down this. You know what? Just so I'm not completely freezing. Oh, you. Where'd you come from? I don't need your arm. Oh, I hate when I do that. Bye. Just glad it's not a Lizalfo one. Those things are boomerangs.
Really?
Yeah. You fling it and it will fly right back to you. Ah! It would help if I paid attention to what I was doing while I was describing what the hell was going on.
Mhm.
What? Damn! Now, if I had the money to get all those damn flags, I barely have enough to get one. Like a bonus. I almost said reload. Whoops. I'm kind of glad I don't have my mic on me, because then the stream would uh, hear me eating. I mean, I probably can hear some noise, but I don't know how much. I haven't figured that out yet. I was like, why am I missing one more slot? That's the camera function. I gotta get that later. Good thing I'm frying. Oops, too far. Oh well. Doo-doo-doo. Haha! I finally figured out. I hate when I can never time the parry. Yeah. Every time I do that, it like messes up somehow. Oh, I came from that end. Dang it, I just now realized I missed that. Oh, I was missing something else. Pretty face, understand what I hold, and I love your ways. Beautiful. Holy crap! What a, that's a dang wall TV. I don't know how much, but that's a damn huge TV. Wow. Yeah. Oh my god. Ouch.
Ho!
Old man, give me your paraglider. Dude's making me run around. I already know where that is. Huh? Yeah, because he's making me go up here somewheres. I already know where to go. It's just annoying. Like, dude, I just want the paraglider. Give it to me already. Like fall damage. No, I'm just kidding. Why am I walking down when I can teleport? What? That's cool. If it was real, that would be really cool if that was real. I'm gonna put this one on our feet. How funny, I wasn't listening to Spotify until my brain wouldn't shut up. Had Spotify on repeat on my head in my head. Hey, at least one of the songs got disappeared for a bit. For a bit. I don't know how long it's quiet for right now. Because it's listening to Beautiful Soul. I'm just talking about like the other. Awful singing. Okay, not really. I just mumbling words. I keep forgetting. I don't need that stupid. I know. I had to move my freaking chicken again. My leg got hot on one side, so I had to switch the other side. Then it got hot there too. Should have closed the window. I just now realized that. I don't know. Sharing our so dark, so late.
Yeah.
Probably. Ah, wrong area. Damn it. Thought it was there. Search. Oh, I already got something in this one. Is you and I. Beautiful soul. Almost didn't break. Why are you bouncing and not breaking? There. Apparently. Okay, first things first. Sorry, old man. I'm coming here first. I need an extra life. Heart container. Please. Oh, I thought I finished talking to her. Oops. Da, 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 da. At least I ain't doing the the other sound effect.
Ho!
Ooh! I want to get up there quick. Old man, stop making me run around. Which is funny. If I could, I would make Link say that. Because everyone thinks he's mute. He's not. That's why they're speech bubbles, guys. Speech bubbles. Oh, I can't find. Okay, now where is that dumb ladder? There it is. When I first went up this ladder, I thought it was gonna fucking break on me.
Alright.
Yeah. This was the hard part, getting right there. Worse than Twilight on that thing. Cutscene!
Well done there, young one. Now then, the time has come to show you who I truly am. I was King Rome Bosphoramos Hyrule. I was the last leader of Hyrule, a kingdom which no longer exists. The Great Calamity was merciless. It devastated everything in its path, lo, a century ago. It was then that my life was taken away from me. And since that time, here I have remained in spirit form. I did not think it wise to overwhelm you while your memory was still fragile. So rather than that, I thought it best to assume a temporary form. Forgive me. I think you are now ready. Ready to hear what happened 100 years ago. To know Calamity Ganon's true form, one must know the story from an age-long past. The Demon King was born into this kingdom, but his transformation into malice created the horror you see now. Stories of Ganon were passed from generation to generation in the form of legends and fairy tales. But there was also a prophecy. The signs of a resurrection of Calamity Ganon are clear, and the power to oppose it lies dormant beneath the ground. We decided to heed the prophecy and began excavating large areas of land. It wasn't long before we discovered several ancient relics made by the hands of our distant ancestors. These relics, the divine beasts, were giant machines piloted by warriors. We also found the Guardians, an army of mechanical soldiers who fought autonomously. This coincided with ancient legends, oft repeated throughout our land. We also learned of a princess with a sacred power, and her appointed knight, chosen by the sword that seals the darkness. It was they who sealed Ganon away using the power of these ancient relics. 100 years ago, there was a princess set to inherit a sacred power, and a skilled knight at her side. It was clear that we must follow our ancestors' path. We selected 4 skilled individuals from across Hyrule and tasked them with the duty of piloting the divine beasts. With the princess as their commander, we dubbed these pilots champions, a name that would solidify their unique bond. The princess, her appointed knight, and the rest of the champions were on the brink of sealing away Ganon. But nay. Ganon was cunning, and he responded with a plan beyond our imagining.
Oh, this happened repeating audio from the TV too?
Might have to turn that down.
He appeared from deep below Hyrule Castle, seized control of the Guardians and the Divine Beasts, and turned them against us. The champions lost their lives, those residing in the castle as well. The appointed knight, gravely wounded, collapsed while defending the princess. And thus, the kingdom of Hyrule was devastated absolutely by Calamity Ganon. However, the princess survived to face Ganon alone.
Link, you are our final hope. The fate of Hyrule rests with you.
That princess was my own daughter, my dear Zelda. And the courageous knight who protected her right up to the very end.
And he looks like the other
That
Zelda or
knight
the other
was
ones.
none other than you, Link.
Look.
You fought valiantly when your fate took an unfortunate turn. And then
You look at
you were taken to the Shrine of Resurrection. Here you now stand, revitalized 100 years later. The words of guidance you have been hearing since your awakening are from Princess Zelda herself. Even now, as she works to restrain Ganon from within Hyrule Castle, she calls out for your help.
Really?
However,
Yeah, I'm
my
gonna mute.
daughter's power will soon be exhausted. Once that happens, Ganon will freely regenerate himself, and nothing will stop him from consuming our land. Considering that I could not save my own kingdom, I have no right to ask this of you, Link. But I am powerless here. You must save her, my daughter, and do whatever it takes to annihilate Ganon. Somehow, Ganon has maintained control over all 4 divine beasts, as well as those guardians swarming around Hyrule Castle. I believe it would be quite reckless for you to head directly to the castle at this point. I suggest that you make your way east out to one of the villages in the wilderness. Follow the road out to Kakariko Village. There you will find the Elder Impa. She will tell you more about the path that lies ahead. Consult the map on your Sheikah slate for the precise location of Kakariko Village. Make your way past the twin summits of the dueling peaks. From there, follow the road as it proceeds north.
I completely forgot about that.
I know that's
want to be at the bingo hall when they're Native American.
and whatnot. And always getting to that point where you don't feel like going gambling anymore.
Good. Dad never really liked her doing that anyway.
You know,
And I think it's
I don't know if she's proud of me or I'm proud of myself.
probably
That's all I heard was that she was down there, but all she's doing is Anna, and she's waiting for Anna. That's so good. Right now she's kind of protect her van with Jenny because she can trust her. Asking Jenny and Jenny keeps telling him to he has to ask his their mom. He wouldn't either. Bugging Jenny asking if she could.
I just realized I was going to on Twitch. Flying around right here. See it? I don't know how it came in. Wrong way. Oh, I guess I can unmute my music too. Oh,
I've been doing this down there waiting for Anna.
I was bored. Stupid bug.
You know, telling everybody they're not there so they go gamble.
No, I didn't get
Downstairs gambling.
Oh, Native American. Most Native Americans gamble. That's you. First. Yeah, they saw me. Let me see. I love you. Ding, ding. I'm almost ready to go back to Tears of the Kingdom. I'm so excited. Haven't you noticed I've been using these instead of the other one? Every time I'm like, crap. sword. Oh, let's drop one of the wooden thingies. That one. They have what? I just now realized you said something. They always do. They stopped because there was no funds and also COVID. Ow, 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 ow. Damn it, ankle. Oh yeah, I can't move this thing around. God damn it. Okay, what? I'm going now. I almost completely dropped myself. I let go of the paraglider for a split second. Clunk, clunk, bye. Oh, I should switch it. You know what? Let's do the long thing. Excuse me. Just so I can have this stupid. Don't need a rusty thing. If this thing activates. Oh! Sweet! I got several. Next, 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 next. Oh, no, not previous. Yes. 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 Over. Oh, it doesn't. It's not on it. Dang it! F you, you damn thing. Should have been in the water. I just now realized I had a funky angle while doing that. You didn't notice I was up instead of sideways? Die already! Thank you. Perish! That's a rusty sword. I know that's a rusty shield, but whatever. That one. God damn it, he saw me. Dang it. He saw me. God. Let's spear him. Oh yeah, I haven't battled a moblin. Like, why is it recognizing as new stuff? Ugh, because I haven't done it yet. It's been bokoblins right now. Perish already! Just go! Get away from me! Be gone! Finally! I don't even know where his weapon went. Probably dropped it when I attacked him. The one had a freaking hoe, the other one had a goddamn stupid mop.
Really?
Yeah. NCIS? Excuse me. Oh. Oh no, this was new, remember? Mediterranean? Was it? Oh, I thought that. Oh, it was the other. It was another one. What was it? Not Caribbean. I already forgot all the below decks.
Yeah. I think it started out with just below deck.
Yeah, it was below deck, and then. Oh crap! I forgot the other one.
Below deck.
Yeah. And then below deck Mediterranean.
Yeah.
The one he didn't see, it was just last year, I think, that it started, was Down Under.
Yeah.
That's what it was. That's the one I was thinking of. Was the Down Under.
I really enjoyed that.
Ah! Much face. I'm trying not to swear too much, but I ran and jumped, and I didn't get my paraglider out right away. See? I was supposed to do that, and I went, did it just as I flew down onto the thing. I was like, oops. Oh, I almost dropped. No, that goes back that way. Been a while. Oh, that's if I accidentally. No. Oh, why? Can I get it with. Nope, wrong. Nope, I can't get it with that. Why? Oh, I had to. I remember. This was the tricky one because you had to maneuver. Ah! See? You had to maneuver it just right to where you still had wind and could glide over there. See? Oh! This pissed me off. Still kind of pissing me off. I have awful timing. I have horrible timing. No! 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 Fuck face. Well, there goes half a life. Almost, yeah! By pure luck. Claymore. Traveler. That's a broadsword, right? Oh, there's a broadsword. Okay, yeah, that. I need that. How dark is it outside? I just now realized we could be watching the solar ray thingy mabobber. Just in the sky somewhere? I don't know. Oh, it's still pretty light out. Yeah, when you open the door, yeah, I see. And I was like, oh, never mind. Still not visible. Really? Oh my gosh. Wow. Can I just not want the stuff anymore? Oh, it's almost broken. Look how durable this thing is. Oh, shoot. Oh! Freaking look at my phone for a split sec. Ouch. Ouch. Oh, it's her phone. Uh-oh. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. Yeah, you said you'd have that tomorrow. Ah! Surprise attack! Oh, you dumb. Surprise attack. I think I'm hearing things. I thought I heard fireworks. I said I thought I heard things. I think I'm hearing things. I thought I heard fireworks. That's fast enough for that second one. Unless it was you hearing you bang things. Oh, shoot. Mama! Turn that down. Oh, audio's still there. I think she turned the camera off. Yeah, you turned the camera off, baby. Papa! Papa! Oh. Love you. Okay. Um. I already know where that. Good sensor. I was almost ready to tell them to come up for Quilly, but then I knew. Yeah, you did. It got interrupted by the call. Remember? You got it out here, but you got interrupted because I was like, "You're like, oh, you noticed my call, so." Why did I break that thing when I had a freaking hammer? I don't know either. Apparently, did I? No, it's right here. Like I know I'm trying somewhere. Whoa, what time is it? Oh, it's only 9. Why does it feel later? Probably because I've done a lot. I don't know, but maybe if I get to the should I try and make it to Cocorico Village and then just end the stream there? Yeah. Try work on the car tomorrow and then back on stream. Should I try to do a whole day stream or like half day stream? What should I do? Half day. So well, it's because I don't stream enough. I need to stream a lot before I get viewers. I also haven't been trying to. I've been trying to share it to my Twitter too, but I keep forgetting to do that. Oh, it's this timing one. God damn. Move! Roll up! Oh, it almost didn't go. Oh, good. This one's the timed one. Woohoo! Oh, shoot. And it went away. God damn it. Have anything to... Do I got something down here? Yes, I do. Okay. I forgot that. Down. I need down. Ah! Fuck it.
Oh no.
I missed the landing. I missed the landing. You know what? Let's do the safe route. Go down the stupid stairs. Slide. The only reason I'm saying that is because I'm trying to get this thing. Good thing I got the metal stasis on. Don't leave without me. Oh. Oops. I didn't time that. Get on the thing. There we go. It never fails. Every time in the damn time. Okay. I don't care. Give me some food, stupid dumb thing. Let's do this one. Oh, I can't believe it. Yeah, if I stream enough, I'll eventually get followers, but usually it's nothing for right now. So, yeah. And the only ones are usually friends right now. I think, Thursday, Tuesday, whatever their username is. Oh, yay! Climbing gear! Okay, now I'm gonna look cool. Look at me! I kinda look like a pirate. With that climbing thing, it looks like a pirate. I'm a pirate. Ah, no. Yeah. Alright. May the goddess smile upon you. The goddess is probably laughing at me, as I said last time. All it ever does. I want that shrine thing off for right now, cause why? I don't want to hear it beeping right now. Especially since I know where most of them are. Yeah. For right now. Oh, I haven't saved in a while. Thank you, autosave, for reminding me. I'd rather have an actual save spot instead of autosave. Oh, dang it, that didn't work. Fuck. Ah. God damn it. Sad part about this, not having enough food and weapons. It's gonna break that. You know what? Let's do this. You know what? Fuck you guys. Follow me into the river. Oh my god, there's still one left. Ding, ding, ding. See, okay, so that's what I was trying to do, was grab this thing, hit these stupid freaking bomb things to blow them up, but I couldn't, because apparently they decided to spawn. I need to find that Majora's Mask. Because then they look at me like, what? 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 I think I might have to put aloe vera on. We still got aloe vera, don't we? I don't want to clip my plant yet. Are you goddamn go? Oh my god! Mama. Oh! Damn it! I don't have enough time to climb up that either to get over there to get it. You know what? Let's see if I can. Let's see if I can. Let's see if I can. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Maybe I can just jump from right here. Get into the shrine. Get into the shrine. Get in the shrine. Maybe I could skip it. Watch. I won't skip it. It won't fucking skip. Stupid blend moon. F you! I think for the stream I'll let it do it, but after that I'm resetting it. I'm not letting it go through its cutscene anymore. Just for the stream, I'm gonna let it go through the cutscene if it does happen after I get out of here. Forgot what this one was anyway. Okay, good. I thought this was gonna be one of those, what do you call it? Test shrine. No, it's unthankful. Ice. Oh, I almost didn't make that. Oh, this one wasn't. I got it, but I never got it. Yeah, see, remember? It was right here where I could see it better. First one's right there. 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 Oh my god! Apparently I still remember it. First shot! You know, every time I restart this, I never get it, huh? Or it takes a couple shots to get it. I can't believe I did that. there was a thing here, I'm leaving it. May the goddess smile upon you. May the smartest guy bile. I'm getting tired. Yes! I skipped it! I love when
Oh. Hmm. Ah.
I guess I should have done that. Oh
Ah.
well. Bug, I'm gonna squash you sometime. If I have to throw my bag, I'll do it. You know what? I will talk to him after I've gotten a. Watch, I do this, and a monster's gonna come at me. Every freaking time I go for a horse. I just need a horse. I mean, I could easily summon Epona, but what's the point in trying to do that when I could catch a
Mm-hmm.
horse? I mean, I could make it simpler for me, but I like a challenge. That black one. Uh, You know how weird it is hearing Bohemian Rhapsody with one earbud? You don't hear the other half of it because it just went to that Galileo, 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 and all you hear is Galileo, Galileo. Oh my god! Dang it! They're running away. in the grass. You know what? I don't think that's gonna work. I'm just surprised attacking them on these things would help. Where are they? Of course, there's monsters right there. You. Ugh. Oh, even the ending sounds weird. It just cut out on me.
Really?
That nothing really matters. Yeah, it cut out. Damn you! That is so weird listening to it like that. I'm almost ready to put 2 in just to. Ow, ow, ow. I realized I'm putting too much pressure on my leg. Ankle. They're right there. Damn it. Okay, so there's definitely a route. I'm just trying not to activate some of those freaking. Some of those are active, not all of them. To go. Well then. Oh, dang it! Fuck! Ah! damn horse. Probably. I don't know. If it's dark out, yeah.
Just 3 hours ahead of us. Or they showing the pictures.
I guess you can try to look. I want to get this damn horse. Should have made more stamina. Oh, oh, oh. Oh my god. I got it. I got the black horse. Oh, that took. It's always best to get the lead horse because they're usually the strongest. Just in the sky somewhere. I don't know whereabouts. Try to look from this way that way. Come on. Come on. I'm gonna slow this off a little bit because I don't want
Hey! Hi. Ah.
board your horse and then on someone that network is evil. Humans have come across wild horses during the trouble. Register, it will become your horse. One person. No? Oh, you're gonna turn off the light or no? Weird. Person to order the horse.
Hey!
Register a horse.
Hmm?
Yeah. Oh, I don't have rupees! God damn it!
Hmm. Oh.
Okay, for right now, you're gonna have to be my. Until I can get rupees. Dang it. That's one thing I forgot to do. Rupees! At least I can get Puerto Rico real quick with this. Oh man. Come on. I'll name you later. Maybe I'll call you Black Stallion. Good horsey.
Mm. Oh. Oh.
What a leafy. It's a Sheikah slate.
Ah.
It means you are the hero of legend. Later, lead me to the leader. I'm just kidding. You can possess this blue waterfall.
Oh.
In any case, it would was real honor meeting you. Why are you pushing me, NPC? I wonder if I'd still have force if I saved. I kind of forgot. Man, all that work And if I feed it and whatnot, it's probably gonna disappear. But I don't know. The game, I forgot. It's been a while. I'll talk to you later, lady. Oh, no, don't eat it. Give it to the horse. Be friend. I think I have a lot of apples. Not hungry anymore? Throw it down. Oh, let's find out. I think I'm gonna get rupees so I can. No! Stay with me. I don't want it to accidentally go somewhere, but I need rupees. Here. Be friend. Be friend. Be my friend! No! Gotcha. I definitely need. I need rupees. You know what? Bye, horse. I'm just gonna get a phone later. Sell stuff. What? I didn't. Okay. Yeah, it's gone bye-bye. Whatever, horse. Come on. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. So let's go back over here. Yeah, the horse is gone bye-bye. Damn it.
Hey!
There we go. Um,
Oh!
oh.
Hmm? Ma? Oh!
That should be enough rupees. Horse, there. We're going back down. No, it left. No, it did. No, it did. No, it did. bit of a trot. Okay, I got rupees. I got rupees. You are now mine. Hi. Bye. I'm glad he didn't freaking run. Then again, it's in the village, so it can't really do much. I'll be right back. I gotta tame a horse. I mean, saddle a horse. Tame a horse. I already tamed the horse. Okay, ready, set, go! I don't think I need to pet it anymore since I gave it some fruit. I would get it, but I'm in the midst of trying to get this thing saddled. Ooh, I almost jumped that. I don't mind jumping, but... Watch out! I jumped over a little rock. Out of the way! I'm on a mission! And the mission is to get this horse saddled!
Ahoy! Hi.
Register horse.
Hmm?
What do I need?
Oh?
Books. Mm. Something simple for right now, I guess. Yeah. Aww.
Ah.
Damn.
Ah. Hmm.
Yeah. I know how to whistle. I accidentally whistle all the time. Okay. Okay, ready? Let's go! Back to the village. Oh, you're kidding me. I knew it was gonna happen out the next night. Just because I skipped it that night. Damn you.
Link, Link, be on your guard. Ganon's power grows. It rises to its peak under the hour of the blood moon. By its glow, the aimless spirits of monsters slain in the name of the light return to flesh. Link, please be careful.
You know how hard it was to not push the goddamn button? I was like, After that, I'm gonna start fucking skipping it. Seriously? A wishing star as I'm freaking going up? That's on the other side of the damn freaking mountain. Yep, that's on the other side of the mountain. I ain't doing that. But at least now I know it's not gonna wander. Good horsey. No? No? Okay. I do need one for this thing. Yaha! You found me! Bye-bye. Stop watching me like that. Okay. Oh, what time tomorrow? Three? Four? That's it? Holy shit. Okay, yeah, save it again. Okay, end in the stream and end in the thing.